In beginning any series of lectures on the Bible and its connection to Western art and Western culture, it is useful to get a certain degree of historical perspective because the Bible, being a very ancient text, seems, well, rather distant from our present-day concerns, and in many respects seems separate and dissimilar to the traditions of Western literature and art, at least insofar as we have immediate access to them within this century. It is in some respects useful for our purposes to look back prior to the age in which the biblical stories were redacted and put together, and look to the kind of foundations of Near Eastern and Semitic myths to see if we can't get a certain degree of perspective on the stories which the Hebrew Bible tells us, and to also get a sense of the historical distance between the Bible and ourselves. It's often the case that when we study the Bible, because it seems so ancient and antique to us, we feel a need to treat it as though it were in a completely separate age in the past. In fact, there are works of literature in the Western tradition, or at least in the tradition that feeds into the Bible, which are at least as old in reference to the Bible as the Bible is with reference to us. In other words, there is an epic, a Near Eastern Mesopotamian epic called the Epic of Gilgamesh, which informs our reading of the Bible, and which, in fact, goes back to the earliest strata of human society and human history. So there are parts of the Epic of Gilgamesh which are borrowed and redacted and brought into the biblical tradition. There are questions of genre and questions of intent which the study of Gilgamesh can help, which we can use in the study of Gilgamesh to help inform our reading of the Bible. And third, it's very useful for us to think about the problem of redaction, how it is that a story or a series of overlapping stories are gradually, or perhaps immediately, merged together to form one unified story. Our investigation of the myth of Gilgamesh, which is a very, very ancient tale, will help us bring together and clarify some of the things that we will have to consider in the process of reading the Bible and reading it closely. Now, the Gilgamesh epic is important for a number of reasons. First off, it's a relatively recent acquisition. It's only in the last century or so that enough of the Sumerian and not Sumerian, but Babylonian tablets have been translated and found so that we could piece the epic together. Prior to this century, our tiny fragments of this epic only suggested that there was an epic tradition in ancient Mesopotamia. We didn't know very much about it. As it turns out, further archaeological investigation, particularly at the University of Pennsylvania, has shed new light on this, which has allowed us to bring together the various tablets which have been found, which tell the Gilgamesh story. And once we formulate this epic, we are given a new perspective, a new way of thinking about the Hebrew Bible, which will turn out to be very useful for our purposes. Now, there are versions of the Gilgamesh epic handed down over a period of many centuries in the ancient Near East. It is likely that the Gilgamesh epic was originally a separate set of stories, perhaps with separate heroes, which were eventually merged into the single hero Gilgamesh. And there are versions of this story in Sumerian, in Babylonian, in Hittite, in Akkadian, and in Assyrian. Because Mesopotamia is invaded regularly throughout its ancient history, as new groups of invaders come in, they absorb what's left of the culture in the area that they've conquered, and they often adapt these stories, particularly the epic story tradition, to suit their own purposes. So there are many versions of the Gilgamesh story, but the story has some sort of permanent value to the residents of Mesopotamia, and for that reason, despite the regular waves of invasion, the Gilgamesh epic is gradually fleshed together, repeatedly redacted, and eventually what we get is parts which form the story that we have today. Now, before talking about Gilgamesh himself, and Gilgamesh is a real person, right? He's in the Babylonian king list from about 2700 BC. It's worth thinking about epic, though, before we go too much further into the details of the story. The reason why is that epic is the most archaic form, not merely of literature, but of the encyclopedia. Virtually every ancient archaic culture has an epic tradition, and built into the epic tradition is their whole view of the world. It is not merely a literary exercise as we might think of, say, Paradise Lost. Instead, the epic tradition in the ancient world contains within it their political theory, it contains within it their sense of ethics, their sense of law, their understanding of things like physics and the physical world. All of their knowledge is packed together in one easily transferable form. It is worth noting that at the time when Gilgamesh is put together, and also at the time when the Hebrew Bible is redacted, literacy is a rare gift. It is an unusual attribute. Most of society is illiterate, and at the time when Epic is put together, and at the time when the stories that comprise the Hebrew Bible are formulated, they are transferred by word of mouth. It is an oral tradition. So, like other epic traditions, the Gilgamesh tradition is oral, and what this oral tradition contains is the entire accumulated wisdom of the society that produces them. All right. Now, in addition to that, Epic always has a certain set of necessities, certain milestones that we find in every epic story. This will be true for the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it'll also be true for the Iliad and the Odyssey, be true for the Ramayana in India, it'll be true for the Sundiata in West Africa, it'll be true for the Song of Roland in Western Europe. All epics essentially do the same thing. Once you realize what they do, you can actually sort of predict the path that an epic is going to take. In the first case, an epic always entails a journey. You can't have an epic at home. If you're going to have an epic, there has to be the movement from one place to another place, and the change in location will mirror some psychic change. In addition, every epic has to have a hero. There are no anonymous epic heroes. You actually find out what some specific and superior man does, and in every case, the epic hero represents the linguistic and cultural group that generates it. So the epic hero is a great example of the society that produces it. For example, Roland is a great example of the medieval knight. He's a fine and superior kind of warrior. Achilles is a superior Greek warrior. Someone like David in the Hebrew Bible is also a paragon, a sort of epic hero when he meets Goliath. In each case, in the case of David representing the Hebrews, or Achilles representing the Greeks, or Roland representing the Europeans, in every case we have a moral paragon. In every case, the epic hero is the standard by which we judge an excellent and virtuous man. Well, we're going to find that that's also true in the case of Gilgamesh. In addition to that, we'll find that epic always legitimizes the political powers that be. You never find revolutionary epics. Whenever one has an epic tradition, it always says that the authorities that are constituted by God or the gods. Aristocrats are aristocratic and superior and deserve their superior station in society. They tend to be politically conservative. They hold down egalitarian expectations insofar as they exist, but it also tends to justify the superior position that an aristocratic elite has. And in every case, the epic heroes are not only the ideal personification of moral virtues, but they are always the beloved of God or the gods. Whatever the local religion is, the gods intervene in epic. Epic is always full of magical, mysterious, divine doings. And in every case, not only will we see these divine doings, but the epic hero is somehow chosen by God, the beloved of God. Right? Without that divine backing, they wouldn't be the superior people that they are. Now, given this fact, let's think about the plot of Gilgamesh. And then once I sketch out the plot of Gilgamesh, because it's a very simple and ancient story, then let's look ahead to the Hebrew Bible and see what we're going to get out of it. Here's what happens in Gilgamesh. In the first case, he's the king of Uruk. Right? And Uruk is apparently a holy city, a sacred city, a city that is chosen and protected by the Babylonian gods, or at least supervised by the Babylonian gods. And the problem is that Gilgamesh is proud, full of hubris, and he oppresses the city. The people are complaining about Gilgamesh. And that's how the scene opens. Now, at the same time that Gilgamesh is oppressing the city, one of the citizens of the city, a hunter or a stalker, goes outside the walls of the city. Now, outside the walls of the city, in every case, in the case of the Hebrew Bible, but also in the case of, say, other sacred cities like Athens, for example, when you step outside the walls, you are symbolically moving from the area of culture and society into nature. So what happens is that the stalker is outside the walls of the city. He's looking around trying to hunt down animals, and he sees Enkidu. Enkidu is the physical double of Gilgamesh. He's a superior man. He looks like Gilgamesh. He's a powerful warrior, full of natural virtue, excellent qualities. He can talk to the animals, right? So he's a natural man. The animals don't run from him. He understands the ways of nature. He is, in some ways, the personification of nature. Gilgamesh, back in the city, dreams of this. he dreams in fact of a meteor, and the meteor is of course always a heavenly, celestial, symbolic symbol in the ancient world. And the symbolism behind the meteor dream is that Enkidu, his double, is out there, and he is going to make a remarkable appearance, an important contribution to the history of Uruk and to Gilgamesh's personal life. And the way in which Enkidu is brought into the city is most interesting, and it has many biblical resonances. A temple prostitute, because ritual prostitution, temple prostitution is common in ancient Mesopotamian religion. A temple prostitute accompanies the stalker outside the walls of the city, has sex with Enkidu. Enkidu is thereby civilized, is thereby tamed. After they have sex, she gives him wine to drink, he becomes drunk, he starts to eat civilized or usual human food. The result is that Enkidu is brought into the city. In other words, Enkidu is civilized through the action of women and through access to sexual knowledge. There is a sort of, if not a fall of man, a sort of loss of innocence, a loss of natural separation from society, which is developed through the agency of the temple harlot. So what that means is that there's a connection between sex and religion and society or civilization. And that's what the bringing in of Enkidu represents. Now, when Enkidu comes into the city, immediately he and Gilgamesh have a combat. Because in the epic tradition, typically the way in which a hero shows his prowess is by finding some person that's worthy of his military attention, that's worth having a fight with, and then showing his prowess and just demonstrating the fact that he is a superior man. And symbolically what that means is that the culture or the people that generate him are legitimately there and deserve to be dominating the society and the geography around them. So Gilgamesh fights with Enkidu, but they don't kill each other. It's not an immediate bloody resolution to the fight. Instead, they become fast friends. And in the epic tradition, that's not so unusual. There are examples of such things in Homer, fights leading to a sort of mutual respect between combatants. That's what we get between Enkidu and Gilgamesh. And once they decide to merge, once they decide to live together and be friends, be very close and tight, something like the kind of comradeship between military heroes that we see between, say, Roland and Oliver in the Song of Roland. Well, they become inseparable and close, but there's not an asymmetry between them. Both are superior warriors, both are superior men. They decide to engage in a common military expedition. They go and fight someone called Humbaba or Huwawa. It's hard to know exactly how to transliterate these sounds from the ancient Mesopotamian languages, but Humbaba or Huwawa is a monster. And of course, monstrous battles with giant opponents are what epic is all about. Usual size, human scale doings are not in the epic tradition. If you're going to fight anyone, it must be a worthy opponent. It must be a man of superior military prowess, or better still, some sort of monster. Humbaba, or Huwawa, guards the cedars. And this is very important because A, cedars are a long way away. There's virtually no forest and no wood in Mesopotamia. If they intend to build with wood, they have to go someplace that has it and either trade for it or steal it. And in this case, what they decide to do is go out on a raid. Now, mythologically, this is phrased as the conquest of Humbaba, Huwawa, the guarder of the cedars. More likely what it is just a raid to go out and steal some wood and kill the local inhabitants should they decide to prevent you from taking the wood. This is one of the ways in which actual historical events are gradually transformed into mythological doings. Once they're so transformed, then they can easily be redacted into a general overall epic story. So they go and they win the cedar wood, they kill Humbaba, and there's another dream that Gilgamesh has, and it's a terrifying dream, and Enkidu interprets the dream. Now this is worth thinking of as well. The idea that dreams are a sort of message from the spirit world or the world of the gods or the world that is somehow apart and different from the world of space and time that we have is a very ancient idea. It is worth comparing this to, say, Joseph's interpretation of the dream of the 7 lean cows and the 7 fat cows. Whenever dreams emerge in the ancient world, particularly in the ancient literary tradition, they are always auguries, they are always foreshadowings of some important set of events which we will eventually see. In this case, it seems that Enkidu interprets the dream of Gilgamesh as relating to death, forcing Gilgamesh to think about the problem of death, changing Gilgamesh's perspective on the world. Well, they come back after interpreting the dream, and Ishtar, the goddess, or one of the goddesses in the Mesopotamian pantheon, comes down, and she's always taking mortal lovers. It happens all the time in Mesopotamian theology and mythology. And she comes down and offers herself to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, perhaps wisely, perhaps not, rebuffs her, says, no, all the men who end up in your life or end up having sex with you end up coming to very bad ends. I don't want anything terrible to happen to me. Now, Gilgamesh himself is partly divine and partly mortal. He's the product of sexual union between the goddess Ninsun and one of the priests of the temple. So he's one of the last of the demigods, semi-gods. He's not quite human, he's not quite divine, he's in between. But he does refuse to make the direct connection with the divine in the case of Ishtar. Ishtar, when she's rebuffed by Gilgamesh, takes it very badly. She takes it so badly she goes back up to heaven or back up to the Mesopotamian pantheon, wherever it is she lives, and tells her dad, who's Anu, who's apparently the head of the Babylonian pantheon, send down some terrible misfortune on Gilgamesh in the city of Uruk. He treated me very badly. He shows no respect for divinity. What happens is that the bull of heaven is sent down, and as a result, they have, first of all, 7 years of famine. Think about the story of Joseph and the cattle. In addition to that, they have earthquakes. And of course, the bull of heaven is the earliest and perhaps the most primitive way of accounting for earthquakes. They don't have plate tectonics. Since ancient Mesopotamia is dealing with an entirely mythological physics, it should come as no surprise later on that their physical outlook, their understanding of the material world, is going to be replicated and represented in their epic tradition. So the bull of heaven is sent down, and Enkidu and Gilgamesh fight the bull of heaven, and they destroy it. After that happens, and of course that's a change, that's a kind of, it's something very Promethean about undoing the plagues or the evils which are sent down from above. And there's a sort of tension between the human and the divine here. It seems that divine initiatives, divine intentions are being frustrated constantly by humans here. And after the bull of heaven is dead, Enkidu actively insults Ishtar. They're cutting the bull apart. He throws a big piece of meat at her, and he's actively trying to generate a conflict between himself and Ishtar. In other words, Enkidu's hubris, Enkidu's refusal to accept his human status exceeds that even of Gilgamesh. And for that reason, Ishtar goes back up to the pantheon, and it's decided among the gods that one of these two must die. In other words, the only way to make good the evil that has been done here is to kill one of them. Enkidu is the one that gets killed because Gilgamesh is still the chosen of the city and the chosen of the gods. So Enkidu is faced with his own death. Over a period of days, he sickens, gets a fever, and dies. And of course, back then, at that level of physical understanding of the universe, if you sicken and die, you sicken and die for some reason. Some spirit, some magical agency is behind it. I mean, nobody has invented microbiology yet. For that reason, the way in which they account for the death is as a retribution for his disrespect towards Ishtar. Before Enkidu dies, first of all, he curses the temple whore that brought him into society. But Shamash, who's the god of the sun, also the god of wisdom in ancient Mesopotamia, persuades him to relent, says, look, granted, you have to die, but you would have died anyway out there in the wilderness. It is better to be a man in society within the walls of the city and face mortality there than it is to die like an animal outside the walls of the city. Enkidu accepts that. It is a validation of ancient Mesopotamia. It's a way of saying that this is a good idea, coming into society, living this sedentary life. Well, at the death of Enkidu, Gilgamesh mourns, but then he starts to think, wow, Enkidu looks an awful lot like me. In fact, Enkidu is the image of me. In fact, Enkidu is not so different from me. And then it begins to occur to Gilgamesh, I'm going to die. And this confrontation with one's own mortality, in some ways, is the touchstone for what it means to have a bounded ego. And this bounding of the ego, this recognition that there are certain facts of human life in which all must participate, that in some ways signals the fact that we're pulling ourselves out of the earliest and most archaic level of society and expectations about the world to a new, more realistic, more general understanding of what the human condition is. And this recognition of death starts the quest. Remember, there's always a journey in a quest. Well, here we're going to continue our journey in a quest. Gilgamesh is going to go look for a way to become immortal.